I'm not drunk. I only had a few drinks to calm myself, to steady my nerves. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have the strength to tell you this story. At least, not without breaking down. You must think I'm crazy for even bringing this up. I probably would have thought the same thing if someone had told me this story, just like I thought the old man was crazy when he first warned me. I should have listened. But I didn't. And now, it's too late. He's dead. And soon I will be too. You'll understand why soon enough. You'll know why the sound of rain sends chills down my spine, and why the sight of dark clouds makes my chest tighten with fear. It started when I was working for a nonprofit medical organization in Nicaragua, in the city of Esteli. I was stationed in a small clinic, helping local doctors treat patients, mostly those who couldn't afford private care. My specialty was mental health, something most of the local doctors had little training in. For a year, everything was normal. I was just another gringo trying to make a difference in a foreign country, blending in with the routine of life. Until early May, when I met the old man. He lived in a small rural community just outside the city, a farmer like so many others, his skin leathered from years in the sun. His daughter had to practically drag him into the clinic. He was ashamed to be there, ashamed to ask for help. The doctor only spent 5 minutes with him before referring him to me. When I sent his daughter out of the room, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He shifted in his chair, picking at his hands, muttering responses under his breath. He wouldn't tell me what was wrong, only that he was anxious about something. Then he shut down completely and left. I didn't think much of it. I couldn't force a patient to open up. I had other cases to handle. It wasn't until a week later that his friend came to see me, concern written all over his face. My Spanish wasn't perfect, but I understood enough to piece together the story. The old man wasn't sleeping. He was acting strange, refusing to leave his home. And worst of all, he wasn't preparing his land for the rainy season, which was only a week or two away. That was unheard of. Farmers work their land until the day they die. At his friend's urging, I went to visit him. I took an old repurposed school bus out to his community, spent an hour crammed against locals who stared at me like I didn't belong. Then, after a long hike into the hills, I reached his shack. He was surprised to see me, hesitant, uncomfortable. But his friend smoothed over the tension, and I got him to talk. At first, he said nothing of value, just strange dreams, restlessness, unexplained fear. But eventually, he told me the truth. 10 days ago, it had rained for the first time in months. Not the full-on downpour of the rainy season, just a brief, violent storm. One that came and went like a whisper of what was to come. The old man had been in his shack when it happened, waiting for the rain to pass before heading back down to the village. That's when he felt it. Something was watching him. At first, he thought it was just another farmer caught in the rain, hiding in the tree line. He called out, but no one answered. Then, when the rain stopped, he went outside with his machete and looked around. Nothing. He would have forgotten the whole thing, except for the dreams. The next night, he dreamt of the forest. He saw the trees dripping with rain, smelled the damp earth. The woods were dark, but he wasn't afraid. It wasn't until he woke up that he realized something was wrong. He had seen the forest through someone else's eyes, and it kept happening. Every time it rained, the dreams returned. But they were different, more vivid, more real. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was moving, stalking, hunting. The last dream was the worst. He was in the forest again, but this time, there was something in front of him. A pig. It squealed, trying to run, but his arm lifted, an arm that wasn't his, and brought down a massive hairy fist. The pig's skull shattered like a rotten watermelon. That's when he realized. He wasn't dreaming as himself. He was dreaming as something else. Something that was hunting in the woods. Something that wasn't human. His daughter had taken him to the clinic, convinced it was the work of a witch. I didn't believe him, of course. I told him dreams were just dreams. A manifestation of stress. Nightmares. Nothing more. But I left him my clinic number just in case. He looked disappointed, but I didn't think much of it. I should have. Because a few days later, I got a message from him. A message that changed everything. I played it once, then again, then a third time. Each time, my stomach sank lower. His voice was shaking, barely coherent. But this is what I could make out. I dreamt again last night. Oh, Christ, the blood. I looked through that thing's eyes again. It's out there. It's hunting me. Oh, God, I saw my cabin. It was close. It's coming for me. Please, for God's sake, help me. Then the line cut out. I checked the timestamp. The message had been left 3 days ago. I called him immediately. No answer. I called again. And again. Nothing. Something was wrong. I convinced myself he was just having a mental breakdown. That he'd gone into isolation, losing himself in his delusions. That I could still help him. I went to a contact in town, got my hands on some Valium, and took the first bus back to the village. I was going to find him. I was going to help him. But when I arrived, I learned he had already gone back up the mountain. And the sky was dark with storm clouds. The sky was dark when I arrived at the village. Thick, heavy storm clouds hung low, pressing against the horizon like a slow-moving tide. The air smelled like damp earth, the scent of rain lingering just on the edge of the wind. I asked around for the old man, trying to keep my voice calm. People were curious about why a gringo was back in their village, but after a few misunderstandings, including an awkward attempt to match me with someone's daughter, I found his own daughter instead. She recognized me from the clinic and gave me an answer that made my stomach drop. He had already gone back up the mountain. He had left at the start of winter, just as he did every year, to protect his crops from deer and thieves. He wasn't expected to return until harvest. I forced a smile and nodded, pretending I wasn't deeply unsettled. I could have turned back, but I didn't. Instead, I told her I needed to check on him, that it was procedure for the clinic, a simple wellness check. She believed me. I wish she hadn't. The hike up the mountain was worse than I remembered. The narrow dirt paths had been beaten down by years of foot traffic, but they were uneven and winding, cutting through thick brush and low-hanging tree branches. I walked fast, hoping to reach his shack before the rain. I didn't. The first drops started falling just as I reached the ridge overlooking his land. By the time I saw his shack, the rain had turned into a downpour. I was soaked within minutes, my clothes clinging to my skin, my boots slipping in the thickening mud. The only thing keeping me steady was the faint glow of the cabin's window ahead. At first I was relieved. The door was open, but the light inside flickered weakly. Maybe he was home. Maybe I'd find him sitting at the table, confused but safe. Maybe all of this was just paranoia. I stepped inside, and my relief turned to ice. The shack had been destroyed. The wooden table was overturned. Plastic chairs lay shattered across the dirt floor. His hammock had been torn from the support beam, now a tangled mess in the corner. Something had been thrown against the walls, several times, and then there was the machete. It was embedded deep in the wall, as if it had been hurled with all the strength a man could muster in a moment of desperation. I swallowed hard and pulled it free. It took 3 tries. The blade had sunk in deep, buried almost to the handle. I turned it over in my hands. The metal was dented, the tip slightly snapped. Whatever he had fought, it hadn't been human. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and sweat. And something else. Something metallic. Something like blood. I turned toward the door. That's when I saw them. 3 human nails, buried deep in the wooden frame. I felt bile rise in my throat. The old man had been dragged through this doorway, and he had fought so desperately that his own nails had ripped from his fingers as he tried to hold on. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the debris on the floor. I had to leave. Now, but the rain. It was coming down in sheets, reducing my visibility to nothing. I'd never find my way back in the dark, and if I tried, I'd likely slip on the muddy slopes and break my neck. I was trapped. I had no choice but to wait it out. My only comfort was the machete in my grip. I didn't know what had taken the old man, but if it came back for me, I would be ready. I tried to stay calm, tried to convince myself that whatever had happened was over. But then, just as I was starting to breathe again, I caught something in my peripheral vision. Something standing just beyond the tree line. Something tall. Something watching me. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. At first, it just looked like a large man standing still in the rain. But something was wrong. The way its arms hung, long and unnatural. The way the rain seemed to cling to its matted body. The way it didn't move, not even a little. Lightning flashed, and I saw it. It wasn't a man. It was a thing. Its body was covered in thick, soaked fur, its arms grotesquely long, reaching down past its knees. Its fingers twitched, massive and clawed, and its face, oh God, its face. It was smiling. Or maybe grimacing. Its lips were peeled back, revealing sharp, jagged teeth, its black eyes gleaming under the storm. The flash of lightning disappeared, plunging the forest into darkness once more. But I knew it was still there, watching, waiting. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Somehow I knew, if I ran, it would chase me. And if it chased me, I wouldn't make it back down the mountain alive. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Then came another flash of lightning, and it was gone. My stomach twisted into knots. I scanned the darkness, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I couldn't see it anymore. That was worse, because now I didn't know where it was. A twig snapped behind the cabin. I spun around, gripping the machete so tightly my knuckles turned white. It had moved. Somehow, impossibly fast, it had gone from standing in front of the cabin to behind it. It was circling me, stalking me, hunting me. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed the door shut and slid the bolt into place. It wasn't much, a weak piece of rusted metal embedded in rotting wood. But it was all I had. I pressed my back against the door, machete clutched in my shaking hands. And then I heard it, a deep, wet breath, just inches away from where I stood. It was right outside. My chest felt like it would burst from how hard my heart was pounding. I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse roaring in my ears, then, bang! The door shuddered as something massive slammed into it. The bolt held, but only barely. One of the hinges groaned, halfway torn from the frame. I held my breath, waiting. Silence. The only sound was the rain pattering against the tin roof. And then, I heard it walk away. Not in a hurry, not rushing, slow, deliberate. It had lost interest. Or maybe it just knew something I didn't. I stayed up all night, gripping the machete like my life depended on it. When the rain stopped, I didn't hesitate. I ran. I ran down that mountain, slipping, stumbling, falling through the mud. I didn't stop until I reached the village. I didn't stop until I was safe. Or at least, I thought I was. But that night, as I lay awake in my apartment, listening to the faint drip of rainwater outside, I dreamt. And in that dream I saw the forest, not through my own eyes, but through its. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I thought I had drifted off. But the moment my eyes closed, I found myself somewhere else. I was in the woods, not the mountains where I had been earlier, somewhere deeper, wilder. The trees stretched endlessly into the darkness, their trunks thick with moss, their branches weeping with rainwater. It should have been cold, but it wasn't. The air was thick and humid, carrying the damp, earthy scent of wet soil and decay. The rain fell in heavy drops, pattering against the leaves overhead and soaking into the ground beneath me. But the worst part? I wasn't me. I could feel my breath slow and heavy. Too heavy. I could feel my limbs. Longer, thicker, wrong. I could hear the squelching of massive bare feet pressing into the mud as I moved. My vision was low, as if I was hunched forward. My arms swayed at my sides, brushing against the dripping undergrowth as I lumbered forward. And then I saw it. nestled at the edge of the trees, just barely visible through the mist. A cabin. My cabin. A bolt of terror shot through me. I tried to pull away, tried to wake up, but I couldn't. I wasn't dreaming. I was watching, and it was getting closer. The structure was small, barely holding together under the weight of time and rot. I saw the remnants of the shattered chairs scattered across the floor, the faint outline of the machete's wound in the wooden wall. No, it stopped just a few feet away. I felt hunger. Not just hunger. A pulling. A deep gnawing need. I tried to scream, to fight against whatever this was, but I was trapped, forced to feel every inch of its twisted anticipation. Then, slowly, its head tilted upward, and I saw a single flickering light inside the cabin. Someone was there. I had to wake up. I had to wake up. But before I could, the creature took a step forward, and I lurched upright in my bed, gasping for air. I wasn't in the forest. I wasn't in the cabin. I was in my apartment in Esteli, but my skin was damp with sweat, my breath ragged, my muscles still locked in that hunched predatory stance. I looked down at my hands. Human hands. Not claws, not thick furry fingers. I let out a shaky breath and wiped my face. It was just a dream, a nightmare. That's what I told myself. But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a warning, like something had reached out and forced me to see. And worse, it knew where I was now. A silent village. I stayed in bed until the first light of morning peeked through my curtains. Then, despite every instinct in my body screaming at me to pretend none of this had happened, I made a decision. I had to go back. Not to the cabin, I wasn't that stupid, but to the village. I needed to talk to the old man's daughter. I needed to know if he had ever dreamt like I just had. I took the first bus back to the village, my stomach twisting into knots with every mile. By the time I arrived, the sky was clear, the storm from last night nothing but a lingering memory in the damp air. But something felt off. The village was quiet. Too quiet. I walked past houses where children usually played, past the market where villagers would sell fruit and handmade goods. There was no laughter, no conversations, just silence, as if the entire village was holding its breath. I spotted a man I recognized, one of the locals who had helped me last time. ¿Dónde está la hija del viejo? I asked. Where is the old man's daughter? His face darkened. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. I blinked, confusion and unease settling in my chest. I tried asking another woman, one I had spoken to before. She wouldn't even look at me. And then I heard it. Whispers, hushed voices drifting from one house to the next. I caught bits and pieces of words. El gringo. No debía regresar. Ella desapareció. He shouldn't have come back. She disappeared. My blood ran cold. I found a younger boy sitting near one of the homes, his eyes wide with something between curiosity and fear. I crouched in front of him. Hey, I said, keeping my voice gentle. Do you know where the old man's daughter is? He hesitated, then nodded. I felt a small wave of relief, until he pointed toward the mountain. My stomach twisted into knots. No, I said slowly. She wouldn't go up there alone. Are you sure? The boy looked me dead in the eyes and whispered, Ella fue llamada. She was called. Goosebumps erupted across my arms. I stood up too fast, my head swimming. No, this couldn't be happening. She knew about her father's fears. She wouldn't just go up there. Unless something had drawn her in. Something that only moved in the rain. Something that hunted in dreams. I had to find her. Even if it meant going back up that God-forsaken mountain. Even if it meant facing whatever took the old man. Even if it meant that, this time, I wouldn't make it back. I didn't hesitate. I turned away from the boy and started toward the mountain path. The villagers didn't stop me. They didn't warn me. They just watched, like they knew I wouldn't be coming back. The sky was deceptively clear as I made my way up the mountain. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth, the remnants of last night's storm still lingering in the soaked soil. I should have brought someone with me. A guide, a group, anyone. But I knew, deep down, that no one would have come. The villagers already knew what had happened, and they were too afraid to interfere. I moved fast, retracing my steps from the last time I had climbed this cursed path. I passed the twisted trees, their roots gnarled like ancient hands clutching the earth. I passed the spot where I had first seen the thing, standing motionless in the rain, its black eyes locked onto mine. I tried not to think about it. I tried not to think about how close it had gotten, about how fast it had moved, about how it had watched me in my dreams. The path grew steeper. The sky dimmed as thick clouds began to creep over the sun. The rain wasn't far. I needed to hurry. The silent shack. By the time I reached the shack, my legs were shaking. The place looked just as I had left it. The broken chairs, the overturned table, the gaping wound in the wooden wall where the machete had once been lodged. But something was different. The door. I had locked it when I left. Now it hung open. I clenched my jaw and stepped inside. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of rotting wood and something else. Something foul. Something wrong. I scanned the room, my heart hammering in my chest. No sign of her. No sign of anything. But the floor. The dirt floor had changed. The scattered footprints from before had been wiped away, replaced by something worse. Drag marks. Long, uneven grooves carved into the earth, leading out of the shack, and into the forest. I swallowed hard, gripping the machete at my side. She had been here, and now she was somewhere out there, the path of no return. I followed the drag marks, my body tense, my breath shallow. The trees closed in around me, their wet branches brushing against my arms like grasping fingers. I moved carefully, stepping over tangled roots, pushing past dense undergrowth. The deeper I went, the darker it became. And then, a sound. A low, distant growl. I froze. It wasn't close, not yet. But it was there. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to move faster, scanning the forest floor for any sign of her. The drag marks continued, weaving through the trees, vanishing briefly beneath thick patches of wet leaves. Then, I saw it. A cloth. Torn. Caught on a jagged branch. I snatched it up, my stomach twisting. It was part of a shirt. A woman's shirt. I swallowed against the rising panic. She was close. I had to keep going, even if it meant walking straight into its territory. The first drops. The wind shifted. A deep rumble echoed through the sky. I felt the first drops of rain land on my skin. No, not now. I wasn't ready. I hadn't found her yet. I looked around wildly, my breath quickening. Where was she? Where was she? The growl came again, closer this time. I gripped the machete so tight my fingers ached. The trees swayed, the leaves whispering in the growing wind. The scent of wet soil filled the air, thick and choking. Then, ahead, a clearing. And in the center of it, a body. I stumbled forward, my stomach twisting, my mind screaming at me to stop, to turn back. It was her. She lay crumpled on the ground, her dark hair soaked, her body limp. I dropped to my knees beside her. "Hey," I gasped, shaking her shoulder. "Hey, wake up!" No response. Her skin was cold. Her lips parted slightly, her breath so faint I could barely hear it. But she was alive. I let out a shaky breath. I could still save her. I had to. I slid my arms under her, preparing to lift her. Then I heard it. A deep, wet breath, right behind me. I turned, slowly. The rain was falling harder now, thick and heavy. But through the downpour, I saw it. Tall. Massive. Its hunched form loomed in the rain, fur slick and dripping. Its arms dangled at its sides, long and unnatural. Its eyes. Oh God, its eyes. They weren't human. They weren't anything. They were just black voids, endless and empty, locking onto me with a hunger that wasn't just for flesh. but for something deeper. Something worse. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The rain pounded against my skin, cold and stinging. And then, it grinned. A slow, terrible grin, its teeth gleaming sharp and jagged. It raised one clawed hand, and then, it took a step forward. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The thing in front of me wasn't human. It wasn't anything that should exist. The rain poured down in sheets, drenching its thick, matted fur. It towered over me, hunched but impossibly massive, its long arms twitching at its sides. And that grin. That awful, knowing grin. It took another step forward. The ground beneath me vibrated with the weight of it. My fingers clenched around the machete, but my hands were shaking. What the hell was I supposed to do? Fight it? I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a hero. I was just some idiot who didn't listen. And now, I was going to die here. Just like the old man. Just like his daughter. Because I was too stupid to leave when I had the chance. But then, she moved. A faint, broken gasp escaped her lips. The old man's daughter was still alive, and that changed everything. I forced my body to move, to push down the panic clawing at my throat. I couldn't just leave her here. I had to get her out, even if it killed me. The first strike. The creature took another step, closing the distance between us in a slow, deliberate motion. It knew I couldn't run. It knew I was trapped. But it was toying with me, waiting for something, waiting for the moment I lost all hope. I gritted my teeth. Fine. If this thing wanted me to break, it was going to have to try a hell of a lot harder. With a sharp inhale, I lunged forward and swung the machete with everything I had. The blade sliced through the air and hit something solid. For a split second, I thought I had done it, that I had cut into its flesh, that I had hurt it. But then I saw the machete had barely sunk in. It was stuck in the creature's arm, buried in muscle and thick, wiry fur. The thing didn't flinch, didn't even react. It just turned its head toward me. Its grin widened, and then it moved. A blur, too fast, too strong. Something heavy slammed into my chest. Pain exploded through me as I was lifted off my feet and thrown backward. The world spun. My back collided with the ground, the breath ripped from my lungs. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was lie there, gasping for air, as the creature slowly approached. It crouched over me, its wet fur dripping onto my skin, its massive hands pressing into the mud on either side of my head. I was done. It had me. I had nothing left. Then, a sound. A whisper. I barely heard it over the rain, but it was there. A voice. Weak. Shaking. Corey. Run. I turned my head. The old man's daughter. She was looking at me now, her lips barely moving, her breath ragged. She was telling me to run. She knew I couldn't fight this thing. And she was right. I had to run. I had to get out. But how? Then I saw it. The machete, still lodged in the creature's arm. A desperate move. I didn't have time to think. I lunged for it, my fingers wrapped around the handle, my knuckles white with strain. And before the creature could react, I ripped the machete free. A deep, wet tear split the air as the blade slid out. This time, the creature reacted. It let out a deep, inhuman roar, jerking backward as thick, dark blood seeped from its wound. It felt pain. It could be hurt. That was all I needed to know. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed the old man's daughter and ran. My legs screamed in protest, my ribs aching from the impact. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The rain pounded against my skin, the wind howling through the trees. Behind me, a deafening, furious snarl. It was chasing us. I knew it was chasing us. But I didn't look back. Looking back meant death. The descent. The path was nearly invisible in the storm, the mud slick and treacherous. I stumbled, nearly falling more times than I could count. The old man's daughter was barely conscious, her body limp in my arms. I couldn't carry her all the way down the mountain. I needed to hide. to lose it. A flash of movement to my right. I veered toward it, an opening between two massive boulders. A tight, narrow space, barely big enough for both of us. I dived inside, pressing my body against the damp rock, shielding her as best I could. I held my breath. The rain thundered around us, deafening and relentless. And then, the footsteps stopped. I could hear it just outside the rocks, heavy, breathing, slow, wet. It was looking for me. I didn't move, didn't even blink. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, a low, guttural growl, and footsteps moving away. I waited until I was sure. Then finally I breathed again. I had bought us time, but not much, because the rain wasn't over, and neither was this nightmare. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The storm raged around us, hammering against the trees, the wind shrieking through the gaps in the rocks. But beneath it all, I could still hear it. The thing was still out there, waiting, hunting. I tightened my grip on the machete, my knuckles aching. The old man's daughter lay limp against the stone, her breath shallow, her skin cold. I had to get her down the mountain. But if I made a move now, it would hear me. It would finish what it started. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. I had a few minutes, maybe seconds. Enough time to make a choice. Stay here and wait for the storm to pass, hoping it wouldn't find us. Or move now, before it decided to check the rocks. I looked at the sky, watching the thick black clouds swirl above. The rain wasn't stopping anytime soon, and that meant, neither was it, the escape. I didn't have time to wait. I shifted my weight, adjusting my grip on the girl. She stirred slightly, mumbling something too faint to hear. I pressed my lips to her ear. Hold on. Then, without another second of hesitation, I ran. I burst out from between the rocks, the rain slamming against my skin like 1,000 tiny needles. I didn't look back, didn't listen. I just moved. The path was barely visible, the mud pulling at my feet, trying to slow me down. But I couldn't slow down, because the moment I stopped, I was dead. A flash of movement in my peripheral vision. The trees shook violently. A roar split the air, louder than thunder, deeper than anything human. It had found me. I didn't need to see it to know it was coming. I could feel it. The ground trembled beneath its weight. It was gaining. I could hear the snapping of branches, the wet thudding of massive feet pounding against the earth. I forced myself faster. The trees blurred past me. The wind howled. The girl was slipping from my grip, her body too weak, too heavy. Hold on! I gasped, adjusting my grip, forcing my legs to keep going. I could see the end of the trail now, the slope downward. If I could just make it, A deafening crash behind me. Something hit the ground hard, shaking the earth beneath my feet. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was almost there, just a little farther. Then, the ground disappeared beneath me. The fall I had hit the slope. And I was falling. Mud, rocks, water. Everything blurred together as I tumbled. The girl in my arms, my body slamming against the soaked earth. I tried to grab something, anything, but the rain had turned the path into a river of mud, pulling us downward at terrifying speed. A sharp pain erupted in my ribs. I hit a rock, then another. The world spun. I couldn't tell where I was anymore, only that I was falling, falling, falling. And then, nothing. Darkness. Silence. The awakening. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was pain. Deep, aching pain that pulsed through my entire body. I sucked in a breath, sharp, wet, ragged. I wasn't dead. Somehow I wasn't dead. I blinked against the rain, my vision slow to adjust. I was at the base of the mountain now. I had made it down. I looked around, my heart hammering in my chest. The old man's daughter lay next to me, her face pale, her breath slow, but she was alive. I exhaled a shaky breath of relief. Then, I froze. Something wasn't right. The rain was still falling, but it was quiet now. The wind had died. The trees were still. And the forest. The forest was silent. Too silent. Like the entire world was holding its breath. I turned my head slowly. And there, standing at the edge of the trees, it was watching me. The last look. It didn't move. It didn't roar. It didn't chase me. It just stood there, half hidden by the rain and shadows. Staring. Waiting. I gritted my teeth, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. It could have killed me. It should have killed me. So why didn't it? Why did it stop? Then I realized. The rain was slowing. Not stopping completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough for it to retreat. Because whatever it was, it only hunted in the rain. And for now, for this brief, fleeting moment, I was safe. I held the old man's daughter closer, my muscles screaming in protest. Then I did the only thing I could. I turned my back to it. And I walked away. The fear that never leaves. We made it to the village. The people didn't ask what happened. They already knew. They took the old man's daughter in, whispering prayers, thanking their gods that she had returned. But when they looked at me, their eyes were different. Not relieved. Not grateful. They looked at me with pity. Because they knew. They knew that whatever happened on that mountain, whatever I had seen, would never leave me. I stayed in Esteli for another week, tried to tell myself I was fine, that it was over. But then, the first storm came, and that night, I dreamt. I dreamt of the forest. I dreamt of something moving through the trees, something with long arms, hunched shoulders, and black, empty eyes. And worst of all, I wasn't watching it from the outside. I was watching through its eyes. I was seeing what it saw. And in the distance, through the thick sheets of falling rain, I saw my apartment in Esteli. It had found me. It was coming for me. And the worst part? The rain hasn't stopped since.